The chaos happening in the United Kingdom should not just be seen as some faraway foreign conflict to those of us here in America. It should be seen as a sign of things potentially to come if we do not maintain our classically Republican culture and stay on watch against the forces that might seek to take us down a similar path as what is happening in Britain. In this video, we're going to explore exactly what happened, and we're also going to explore the warnings and lessons that those of us here in America can take from what's happening over in Britain and hopefully apply to our own situation here in this country. But before we get into all that, my friends, I hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. I am your host. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical lens, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to make our channel successful. The revolution of the mind is upon us, my friends, and all of you, an army of thinkers that I believe can come apart due to my efforts, are going to be the ones to lead it. Thank you guys so much, and please enjoy the video. So, many of you have probably heard by now that there have been a recent string of riots and protests, and we'll discuss the distinction between the two in this context in a second, happening in the UK. And I'll just give you a very brief overview. I'm not going to give you a massive in-depth dive of everything because I'm an American commentator. I like the UK. I think I have friends in the UK. I have an affinity towards the UK, but my concerns are ensuring that Americans know what to do and what lessons to take from this, not to get involved deeply in their matters. But I will give you an overview. There was a stabbing in Southport at a Taylor Swift-themed dance event where 3 little children were murdered by an immigrant. Now, this stabbing set off a powder keg that had been present in the UK for a very long time. The British media are kind of trying to attribute all of the response to the stabbing in Southport as Islamophobia and racial hatred. In fact, there's been a division in the British media and in the American media, to the extent that they covered this, between the anti-racist protest and the supposedly racist protest. So that's the division that they have made. And so obviously this is an attempt to control the narrative. This is obviously not entirely fruitful or true, and we'll get into that in a second. But where this was called Islamophobia, what actually has been happening in the UK is that for many years they have been experiencing migrant violence and violence from people that were not originally born in the UK or whose culture is distinct from that which has been dominant in the UK for a very, very long time, English culture. Whether it be, for example, the no-go zones of yore, which were, by the way, once a term used by the government to describe entire areas where there was some kind of ethnic hegemony, where certain people were in danger. Like, for example, there were some areas in the UK where women who didn't cover their hair were in danger of facing some kind of violence, so on and so forth. There were some areas where Sharia was put into effect. Well, these used to be called no-go zones, but then a few years after that, after they began becoming in popular use, the British government actually stopped using that term, and they began to ignore any instances of migrant violence or immigrant violence as just being Islamophobia and xenophobia and racism. Whether it be, several instances that have happened in London where there have been migrants that have stabbed people. This has been a situation that has been boiling up for a very long time. And the Southport killings kind of just caused the whole thing to explode. And we got what we got, unfortunately. So after that, there was a string of riots across the country. There was the burning of buildings. There was the destruction of property. But the British media tried painting this almost solely as something to do with the racists, the English people, is really what they were trying to say, who were rioting, when in all reality, there were also gangs of seemingly Arabic individuals, men, running around with 12-inch knives, destroying cars, storming pubs.
What are they doing? Oh, the battering it! Battering it! Get him in! Get him in! No! Open the door! Let go!
And causing mayhem. Now, these may just be absorbed into the category of the anti-racist protest, but these don't seem to be an act of protest. These seems to be acts of vigilantism and violence. Now, in response to this whole chaotic situation, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, shamefully went to the press in a press conference. And he did a few things. Instead of actually condemning what happened fully, and instead of actually addressing some of the underlying cultural issues that brought the UK to this point of disorder, he instead, as the media has done in Britain, defined this entire issue as an issue of racism versus anti-racism, as xenophobes versus those who are benevolent, as multiculturalism versus cultural exclusionism and xenophobia. And he then used that to say to the Muslim community in Britain that there is absolutely nothing wrong here and that we're going to protect you. And he then said if there are people that are going to voice their opinions in a way that could stir up hate or whip up violence, whatever that could mean, they would be jailed. And he also sent a message clearly to social media companies saying they could also be held liable for what happens on their platform. Now, this has led to accusations of two-tier policing. And this has also led to several clearly unjust arrests. So, for example, there was a man in Belfast, a 18-year-old man, who was arrested simply for watching a group of riots. He didn't even participate. He simply watched, and the judge said he doesn't have to throw a bomb or brick to be involved in disorder if he's present at disorder. There was a man, this is a famous case, a man named Tyler K., who went to prison simply for reposting something on X, not even saying it himself. He reposted something on X, and he had reposted it with the expressed intention of seeing if the government would jail him simply for reposting something. He went to prison. He's a father of three. He went to prison for 3 years and 2 months. And there's also been an ordinance in Britain that fast tracks people that have been accused of stirring up hate online through the legal system, therefore calling into question issues of due process, and puts them in jail, as Starmer promised. He promised that they would be held on remand. That means they're going to be pushed through the system with expeditious emphasis, which is quite unfortunate. Due process requires time. So, as we look at all of this, we have to ask ourselves as Americans, what lessons can we take from this? Well, first of all, it's clear to me, to all my friends in the UK, your people have been infantilized for decades. You have been sold the false doctrine of multiculturalism, which doesn't just say that all cultures are equal. That's the bubblegum pop idea of multiculturalism. But the true significance of multiculturalism and its ugliness is that the dominant culture is evil. And having people assimilate to the dominant culture of a country they go to is evil, and it disregards their culture. And there is no right for anyone in any culture to judge another culture, unless, of course, you are judging the dominant culture. This is kind of where the logic of multiculturalism falls. And so multiculturalism pushes this vision of anti-assimilationism, where people from other countries can't integrate into the institutions, norms, or mores of people in the country they go to. And also, it fosters this antipathy, this hatred towards those in the dominant country. And then, of course, naturally, by doing that, it encourages a kind of social antagonism, which, of course, leads to the kind of things we see. It leads to a loss of social cohesion, which leads to a less functioning civil society, which leads to a breakdown in civil society. And so the British people have been infantilized by their media, by their government, that if they don't accept this new cultural change, if they don't accept essentially the erasure of their culture, they are somehow parties to racism or xenophobia or nativism. Well, unfortunately, regardless of what anyone tells you or what terms people impose upon you, you must recognize that those terms they are imposing upon you are thought-terminating cliches that are meant to suppress your reason and suppress your patriotism for your nation and cause you to get lost in this notion that you must sacrifice your country and sacrifice the proper idea of your country to accommodate the needs of others who refuse to even accept the idea of your country. I'm sorry this is happening to all of you, and I wish you Godspeed, but you have been infantilized for decades. And Keir Starmer, instead of actually addressing this core cultural issue, he attacks his own communities while they are burning. There are reports that people throughout several cities in Britain were not comfortable leaving their homes. Random bystanders in their cars were attacked by gangs of people who clearly, rejected the idea of English culture, just to put it nicely, things of that sort. And those people aren't being addressed. This is what they call a two-tier policing. This is a big deal in Britain. So my condolences to you, but this is a result of multiculturalism and infantilization. Now, on to the warning for America, which is the thrust of this video. We have to understand, my friends, that there are a lot of people that say that the United States and America, the United States and Britain are basically one and the same. There was a prominent commentator in the UK that said that America is just an extension of Britain, that the founding fathers all saw themselves as Englishmen. You guys probably know who I'm talking about. I don't intend to call anyone out in this video, but he was pretty adamant this is the case. And while this was only half true, of course, the founding fathers, many of them did come from British territories, did come from England. As America developed, America undertook a distinctive character of its own in its political and its social order. The Jeffersonian tradition actually puts the idea that America is merely an extension of England. It puts that idea to shame. John Taylor, who was an assistant to Thomas Jefferson, he was a writer, a philosopher, a thinker in early America, wrote in an inquiry into the principles and policies of the government that America was different from the British conception of society and government, because the British conception of society and government views society and political authority as one cohesive unit. And America, by virtue of its existence and its political order, based on the classically Republican model of government, sees society and political authority as two separate domains. Therefore, any relevance that Britain has to us is only a relevance of being a footnote, a kind of past tense footnote, that we have some of their frameworks, some of their institutions, but largely the distinctive character of America is distinctly American, not distinctly English. Christian, why am I talking about this 270 plus year metaphor? Well, very simply because of this. You can trace what is happening right now in the UK to the adoption and preservation of an old world mindset. The distinction between the old world and the new world is oftentimes a geographical distinction. But my argument has always been that it should be an ideological distinction, because the old world was a place, not a place, a certain geographical context, where several ideas, such as the divine right of kings, royal absolutism, parliamentary absolutism, the feudal system, the primacy of familial bloodlines, the primacy of custom, the primacy of habits over anything else, these were the things that guided the societies of those days. And those principles are the reason why human society for so long remained stagnant or relatively stagnant. The level of progress we had under those principles was so incredibly minute, because they mute the human spirit and they deny the principles that create the kind of societies we need to flourish. The New World came in and said, familial status or the divine right of kings or the monarchy or parliament, these are not the movers of human greatness. These are not the movers of society. These are not the purveyors of justice. These are mediocre concepts that only exist because there is not a sufficient evaluation of what man needs to flourish, what man needs to have a good society. And the New World said, no, it is the individual and his ability to make rational decisions. That's the prime mover. It is the individual and his ability to recognize the importance of reason and recognize the social duties that create for a civil society and then ultimately produce the context for freedom. That's the prime mover. It is the ability of the people to consent to the government. That's the prime mover. It's the ability of the people to understand what is happening in authority. That's the prime mover. It's the ability of people to recognize that the government is an agent of theirs, not a custodian of their society. That's the prime mover. Well, in the UK today, there is still a spirit of parliamentary absolutism that has infested that society and that has made it prone towards authoritarianism. In the UK, there is this notion that there is no separation between political authority and the maintenance of society. That is why in the UK for years now, you have had YouTube streamers from Ireland and content creators going to jail for making jokes on behest of those jokes allegedly being hate crimes, because there is a perception that it is the duty of the government to fight hate, not the duty of those in society to regulate their own communities and deal with hateful beliefs, if they so choose, in their own way, which, by the way, is the proper domain. You cannot instill virtue by force. Political authority is simply force, dressed up with a process. You cannot instill virtue by force. You can only instill virtue by creating a culture where virtue is the emphasis, and then creating customs and habits and mores that emphasize that, and then teaching people through rational argumentation why you should have a certain kind of character, why you should believe a certain kind of thing. That is how you have a sustained, healthy culture, not by force. But in the British conception, unfortunately, the old world conception, there is no distinction. There hasn't been a distinction for a very long time. Go back through British history. The Magna Carta is the first time we see a distinction between the society and some people in the society. And the Magna Carta is oftentimes given too much credit. It secured rights, yes, but it secured rights for a particular class of people, not for the whole society. Now, in the 18th century, there was a lot of talks of classical republicanism going on in Britain, but some of those expositors of that idea were killed, like Algernon Sidney, a philosopher many of you probably never heard of. He was a massive advocate against the monarchy, and he died for it. But many of his ideas actually established and influenced the establishing of America. So what am I saying? What I'm saying is this. After the Glorious Revolution in England, when royal absolutism, the absolute power of the monarchy, was dissolved, parliamentary absolutism took its place. And now Parliament was the absolute authority. The law was the absolute authority. Well, Keir Starmer is treating his civilians as if that same spirit of parliamentary absolutism is still the case. Here in America, we need to be very careful that we do not fall into the same trap of legalistic absolutism that Starmer has sicked upon his citizens, that unfortunately has been embodied in the British political conception for hundreds of years. America, of course, is a different fundamental base than that. But we have seen several instances in our own country where governors of certain states like Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer, in the name of protecting the community, in the name of benevolence, used an ethic of legal absolutism to enact injustice upon their own communities, to close churches, to restrict people from going outside because of a virus, so on and so forth. That is a very real danger. We should also understand as well that there was a police commissioner in Britain that threatened to deport, or rather to extradite, who suggested the ability of extraditing people who whip up hate or stir up hate online. And there has been an immense move from the British left, whether it be The Guardian, whether it be other figures in the British left, to actually charge Elon Musk for running X and allowing certain information about the riots to go ahead unfiltered. In a society where you value the political authority within the context of protecting sensibilities and feelings, you can easily get a kind of despotism. And the progressive ethic here in America, whether it be embodied by Kamala Harris or her running mate, or whether it be embodied by the other people that have been in the progressive tradition like Woodrow Wilson, has all been about protecting sensibilities. It's all been about using the government as an agent to maintain and to manage society, as opposed to seeing government as an agent of society. We ought to be very careful. That is the political warning that we have in America. The cultural warning is very simple. Americans have also faced the same kind of posturing and infantilization that the British people have, where they are told that we have to endorse diversity as a strength, where we have to take anyone who comes to our borders because it's the compassionate thing to do, and where we have to understand that even if people break our laws or don't follow our mores or our customs to come here, it is only the right thing to do to allow them to stay here. That is infantilization, because that teaches an entire people that their way of life is insignificant in the face of people who haven't even considered or may not consider their way of life, just because there is some ethereal obligation to the downtrodden. Well, guess what? There is no obligation morally to the downtrodden. That's an abstract category. There is only an obligation to those who are near you and within your community. And even then, those obligations are limited on the basis of universal principles. They are not obligations that you must that force you to sacrifice your own stuff for other people. Man is not under an obligation of self-sacrifice. It's a virtue in some cases, but it's not an obligation. And yet it is oftentimes treated as an obligation. And so as America's culture changes, the more we accept that kind of infantilized view of immigration and migration, we could easily face some of the same ethnic conflicts that they are facing over in the UK. This is a significant warning to us. We must not be against, in my opinion, immigration, but we must have a system of immigration that is based on one's ability to understand the worldview of Americanism, because Americanism is a worldview, and one's ability to appreciate the Constitution, one's ability to appreciate civic duties, and one's ability to integrate these appreciations into their proclivities every single day. Any immigration system that eschews these basic requirements is not an immigration system. It is a system that is going to allow different cultures to change your country irreparably. Immigrants are not the problem. A lack of assimilation is the problem. And unfortunately, in the UK, they were told that a lack of assimilation is a virtue, that diversity by itself is a virtue. But I'm here to tell you, diversity is not a virtue. Diversity is not a political value even. Diversity is simply what happens when you have human beings in a certain area. It is a naturally occurring phenomenon because by virtue of us being a human being, we can all have the same color, the same religion. We're still going to be diverse in certain areas. We're still going to be diverse, whether it be in our outlook, our habits, our way of life. We're still going to be diverse. And that's fine. But they have treated diversity, sort of aesthetic diversity, a diversity of appearances and religious ways, as some kind of value. And it just doesn't follow logically that that's the case, because it's not the case. It's not the case whatsoever. Because not all ways are good ways. Not all ways are the best ways. And some ways are better than others. So we have to ask ourselves, my friends, are we going to be heading towards a republic that is strong, that has a bedrock of first principles, and that remains rooted in that? Or are we going to, like our friends in the UK, be forced by our political authorities to have a conception of government that it should manage our society, and it should open up our society to other things that may not be good for our society, and that we're going to accept it in the name of being a good person? The good person is someone who's going to be honest with themselves, and someone who will have a patriotism for their country. And they are someone who will reject the plans of those who would erode the foundation upon which that patriotism stands. Let what is happening in the UK be a massive warning to all of you. That this culture, this classically Republican culture of freedom, it can be lost. But let's not lose it. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can. I love you guys so much, and please, stay pensive. Bye, guys.